All right. Well, welcome to our first edition of 2020 Cinetopia podcast and radio show on EHFM. I am here. Well, we have some new people here, but I'm here with Jim Ross. How are you doing, Jim?
Good. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you. How was your New Year's and Christmas and all?
Good. I spent most of it in snowbound Maine. It didn't actually snow, but being Maine in winter, there was snow everywhere, constantly, of course.
I remember that from Vermont. It's pretty cold up there. Yeah, well, I stayed here in rainy Edinburgh mostly. But anyway, so we have two new people, not new to Cinetopia at all, but new on our radio show. So Carice Evans, how are you doing?
Hi, Amanda. I'm good. How are you?
Very well. Carice, tell me a little bit about your involvement with the Short Film Festival and the Edinburgh International Film Festival. What makes you love talking about film and all those good things?
Well, I mean, I've had quite a good last year. I've had an opportunity to work for the Glasgow Film Festival and Edinburgh International Film Festival again. And since I moved to Edinburgh a couple of years ago, I got involved with the Edinburgh Short Film Festival, and I've stuck around either helping out with logistics or programming with that since. I programmed the festival single-handedly this year, I think, for the first time, which was obviously done with a huge amount of help from all of our festival screeners. But yeah, it was a great addition. I'm now working full-time for the Edinburgh International Film Festival for the time being. And yeah, I mean, Edinburgh's a great city for film, great city for festivals, and I'm looking forward to seeing everything that the Edinburgh International Film Festival does this year with a new festival director at the helm.
Yeah, no, that's going to be very, very exciting. You and I both went to that same film program at the University of Edinburgh as well, so we have some connections there.
Yeah, the film exhibition and curation course at Edinburgh University seems to be a pretty great starting ground for anyone who wants to get into film exhibition, filmmaking. A lot of people have gone on to work in sort of gallery curation, some people in marketing and advertising in film. So it's a really quite an interesting course, bringing people from all across the world and all different disciplines.
Yeah. Well, thank you. And our next contributor this month is Servina Scateni, who has done some work with us at Cinetopia, particularly our doc screening and Scalorama period in September. Servina, how are you? And what brings you to Cinetopia's podcast? What do you do in the film realm?
Hi all. Hi Amanda. How are you doing?
Very good.
So, well, I mean, usually I'm like a freelancer I'm freelancing like film journalism. So basically I'm writing reviews and like features. So yeah, I mean, I'm just interested in films. So I thought like jumping into podcast would be like a nice thing to do for the new year. Kind of a New Year's resolution. So yeah, here I am talking about films with like nice guys.
Yeah, and you've done some really amazing reviews for big places like The Skinny and Little White Lies, and so
it's picking up the freelancing stuff. So I've got like a nice opportunity last year. I've been like participating at the BFI London Film Festival Critics Mentorship Program, and then after that, I basically wrote a thing for like Little White Lies, and then like for like Movie Notebook and this kind of stuff. So yeah, as I said, it's picking up. So looking up for more opportunities in this year. So yeah, we'll see.
Well, we look forward to having you both on this particular edition and in the future, and to give your impressions of the films that we're going to review. There's a lot of films we're going to review this month. We're going to start with Little Women, and then we'll follow up with 1917. Little Women was directed by Greta Gerwig, 1917 directed by Sam Mendes. A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood. Jim, can you tell me who's directed that?
Marielle Heller.
So that's the third film. And finally, Uncut Gems.
Josh and Benny Safdie. I'm here for all your Wikipedia purposes.
All of that, plus I'm sure we'll get a little awards discussion in there as well. All right, so we're back, and we are starting with the first film, Little Women, which is the latest adaptation of the Louise May Alcott famous American novel that we've all seen in multiple different adaptations over the years. This time it was directed by Greta Gerwig, and we picked these films way before before all of the news that's been coming out. But I think you might have known that it was snubbed from the BAFTAs. It wasn't nominated, or Greta was not nominated for Best Director of the Golden Globes or BAFTAs. And we are pre-recording this, so I won't be able to tell you whether or not that's the case for the Oscars either. But the film is about four sisters during the time of over like a 7-year period. It's a really famous novel, and Jo is played by Saoirse Ronan, and Meg by Emma Watson. Florence Pugh plays Amy, and Eliza Scanlon plays Beth. Marmee is played by Laura Dern, and then we have a lovely, I forgot her name, but Meryl Streep. What is the aunt? As the horrible aunt, yes. So I saw this last night. It actually took me a couple weeks to decide to do it. I really loved I grew up with the 1994 edition and with Winona Ryder and whatnot. So the idea of doing another adaptation of Little Women wasn't something I was jumping to see, even though I'm massively in love with Greta Gerwig's work. And I was blown away. I think I read some reviews that said this was near perfect, and to me, it was a near perfect film. So I'm shocked that all the other films that have been getting all the the press and the nominations, that Little Women didn't see itself at the forefront of these nominations. What do you guys think?
So this is my first experience of the Little Women story. I haven't read the book. I only really have a vague awareness of it because the book is more of an American thing anyway, but I've only got really a vague awareness of the story. I haven't seen any of the other adaptations like the 1994 film or anything like that. I thought this was excellent. I thought it was a brilliant film. I'm going to disagree on the near perfect. I thought it was a little bit choppy at the start. I found it a little bit hard to follow, maybe in the first 20 minutes or so. Because the way Greta Gerwig has done it, because of course she adapted it and wrote the script here as well, is we've kind of got interweaving timelines of the later period when Saoirse Ronan's Jo is coming back to Concord, Massachusetts to see Beth, her ill sister, and then their earlier scenes from childhood when they were all still at home. And I did find it a little bit hard to follow at the start. Even then, I think she's doing some interesting stuff. I've actually seen this twice, right? I saw it in early December, and then I saw it again when I was in the States over Christmas because I went with some friends to see it. And even then, the part that I found quite hard to follow at the start, she's doing a lot of stuff to set up character interactions and our understanding of kind of the dynamics of these characters later on. So whilst it was a little bit hard to follow at first, she's still doing a lot of kind of necessary, interesting stuff there. After that, I thought it settled into kind of a beautiful storytelling rhythm, really. And, it's not necessarily the most flashy way of delineating these timelines. Like, we've got different color grading, we've got different kind of like color palettes going on, but it means that you can then follow that story and you can follow those two timelines really well, really easily. And I think that's why I'm kind of surprised she's not popped up in more of these awards director conversations, because I think it is a really well directed film. I do. And to take that story and make that easy to follow, as I say, after an initial kind of rocky start for me, it then really makes it an easy story to connect with when they're linking back to experiences in their life. And the performances are all excellent. So, for me, it ticked a lot of boxes, and I really think it was a superbly made film.
I think I'm together with Jim in not having seen any adaptation before of this novel, and also I'm probably one of the only women in the world who haven't read the novel itself. So I was pretty new to the story and everything. Although, yeah, of course, I've got some back knowledge of that. And that said, I was really, really intrigued by the film. And yeah, I agree. I think in the very beginning could have been a little bit confusing. Almost mainly because it starts pretty much at the very end of the novel itself. So with people like knowing the story, they might have been like, oh, but this is the ending, so why is I here? And we like people not knowing the story, it might have been what's happening. And then at first it's not really clear when they're like we're back in time and then like in the present and stuff like that. But I think that when it gets like to the middle section of the film and like to the most like emotional and like gripping part of the film, it's just amazing how Gerwig handles like this non-linear storyline, and also like the color palettes, as Jim was mentioning, they're just really great. I mean, they are really helpful like for maybe people not really use like watching this kind of art house films and following like different way of handling like storylines. So yeah, color palettes were really great for like basically detecting and like understanding what was happening and when that thing was happening. So we got a lot of like cold colors and this kind of a shallow palette, and then at the other side of the spectrum we've got this like beautiful autumny color and like an amazing photography. So yeah, I mean, that really nailed it. And also like performances wise, the film was great. And to be honest, I'm not really surprised that the film got snubbed by like male critics. I think mostly because I mean the story in the end like it's kind of the like female story, like the epitome of a female story. So I'm guessing that majority of male critics, they didn't read that and they're not just interested maybe in female directed films, so maybe not that much. So yeah, no surprise there for me, but maybe just me not being like very hoping and hopeful for like people to get into films or like different kind of directors. So that's me. But yeah, anyway, it was a great film, so I hope it gets like some satisfaction at the Oscars.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that you mentioned how it's been snubbed potentially on the grounds of the fact that it's got a female director, and not only a female director but a female writer, the same Greta Gerwig, and also a predominantly female cast. And I think your average male moviegoer, and sadly your average male BAFTA voter or award voter, looks at it and assumes that there's nothing in it for them. Talking about the structure of the film as well in relation to that, the way Greta Gerwig kind of restructured the film and kind of changed Joe's story, that's one of the biggest kind of criticisms that a lot of women have over the book, is that Louise May Alcott kind of concedes, and instead of having Jo go on to be this kind of single emancipated writer that she maybe wanted her to be, and that maybe lots of people craved for her to be, she settled, and Jo settled and got married. And I think there are lots of dualities between the character of Jo, Louise May Alcott, and now Greta Gerwig herself as a female auteur. She is reported to have not thought that this film was one that she would get a chance to direct. So she took the script to the studio and was really kind of excited about the idea of the film getting made in this way that she had written it, this way that she had structured it. But she believed that the project was going to get passed on to someone with greater experience, someone who could tell the story with more skill than she could. And I think that's such a marker of this imposter syndrome that so many women have, both in the arts and across the world, is that they feel like they need to have done so much more than maybe the average man feels like he needs to do before he can come and sit in that director's chair, CEO of that company, whatever it is. So yeah, I mean, it would be great for Greta to see some awards come out of this, but I think she can at least rest easy on the fact that it's been such an audience celebrated film, and that in itself is such an important thing.
Absolutely. And I went into a little research on how she looked at this piece, and speaking of the structure that you were talking about, I did feel a little bit at the beginning, this is a different way. It's sort of expectations you have of being an American who's read the book and who's seen all the adaptations and grew up with it. And it was a very, very important book for females growing up. I think that some of the things that you had with expectations, and one example would be the Amy character, originally in '94 was by Kirsten Dunst, and she was quite bratty. And then even within the book, supposedly she's a brat. But what I read is that Greta was really kind of finding like her voice and making her kind of a more well-rounded character. So at first when I'm watching it, I'm like, oh, she doesn't have that sort of Kirsten Dunst like spunk or something like that. But then ultimately what happened was the way that Greta did so much research. I mean, there's so much almost like dramaturgy, as if you will, like about a book, and then turning it into a script that was having a dialogue with, as almost, I think she said, her as a modern scriptwriter, and then Louise May Alcott, and then these performers, I think is just really spectacular. And I think, Serena, you were mentioning the photography. There were parts of that film that just blew me away, like particularly the beach scenes with, I was just very quite, like you said, like certain soft palettes, but then like this just beautiful, like sort of sun on the characters. Just absolutely stunning, like more than many films I saw last year. So that would actually be my favorite film. If I could go back and do our favorite films of last year, I wish I could have put that one on there.
Yeah, that's the thing. We did that blog post that we did for our favorite films of 2019. I think it would have been in there for me. It's interesting the fact that like men don't seem particularly interested in this film, and I really can't put it down to anything more than the title, quite frankly. I mean, literally the fact that it's called Little Women, because obviously there's a lot in there, and the main kind of thrust of it is the role of women in society and what's expected of them, and I mean that's fairly obvious from watching the film. That's a massive thread through it, but it's not as if there's not things for people outside of that gender to relate to. And one thing that I found quite interesting with the whole it was really the kind of the storyline that covers Joe, Laurie, and Amy, and Amy is the one who ends up going to Europe. And it was just all these little things that just knock your life in a different direction. The little things that happen, which then set you on a path which is really quite different to the one that you'd maybe had imagined for yourself. And that's one aspect of it that I feel is kind of universal. I think this idea of a fondness for the innocence of childhood, that is a common one. So I find it a little bit depressing that it doesn't maybe get a little bit more of a fair shake on that sort of basis. On the Amy character, which we were talking about, it was absolutely wild to me when I went and read about the book afterwards that there's kind of like this anti-Amy movement. Like people, like when people are doing the kind of the discussion of like, oh, which March sister are you? Nobody seems to want to be Amy. Absolutely no one. And I think credit really needs to go to Greta Gerwig's script and Florence Pugh's performance for making her a very relatable character. And when she's playing the younger scenes, where confusingly I think she's meant to be about 13 years old, but I actually think Florence Pugh does quite a good job with that. She is very relatable. I mean, yeah, she is a bit bratty. She's like, she's maybe a little bit entitled and spoiled, but you can relate to it, and what she wants out of life, and how her goals differ to that of Joe. And I think they've done a very good job of that, especially when I do see the reaction to the character in general. I was kind of surprised. So I think there's a certain amount of rehabilitation of characters that has gone on in the script, and I don't think anybody is particularly favoured. I don't think anyone's path, Joe, Beth, Meg, any of the characters, I don't think they're particularly favoured as like, oh, well, this is the more worthy thing to do. This is what you should be doing. And I think that's an important thing to present with those characters, and I think they've done an excellent job of doing that, and that belongs to both Gerwig's script and the performances of the actors.
Yeah, and I also I saw this really funny sort of thing that I think it was somebody from Sex and the City watched. I think it was Cynthia Nixon, and she was like, "It's us," There's this like funny way that there's this combination of this storyline of four powerful women and four women sort of coming together, and storylines that we see throughout time that people respond to, and the way she filmed it has maybe some sort of similarities to that, which I thought was quite funny that I there was that connection. But I would be remiss not to mention again what you said, Carice, about the way that Greta plays in that story about Joe and her relationship. So the way that she handles the fact that Joe ends up, again, previous stories, or actually the book, she ends up marrying an old professor, and who she ends up in this case, the way, I won't spoil too much, but it really does play with the idea of meta-ness in a film, and how a story was maybe expected to be told and at the time, and what maybe she would have wanted it to be told,
Absolutely. And, similarly to what Jim says, there are so many different narratives for each of the women in the film, and that is important, that people aren't coming away from the film saying, okay, so Joe does not want to end up marrying a man, but it's absolutely fine for Meg to get married. And that's the really important message here, is that there's not one thing that makes you a woman, one thing that makes you a feminist. It's just that choice, that option, that chance to make that decision completely freely out of your own will. And it's also interesting that we talk about relatability in terms of bringing in the audience. And I completely agree with you, Jim. There are so many things there that people who don't identify as female can come to this film, and they can find messages in it that they can relate to, and they can find stories in it that they see themselves and their friends and family in. But also, does it need to be relatable to bring men in? For decades, for a century, women have been going to see films that don't have them in it. They don't have a strong representative female character or any female characters in, but you go and watch it because it's what's there, and it's, you know, it's entertaining, it's whatever. And obviously there are films that are more problematic, and there are films that we can still as women go see with, I mean, we're about to talk about 1917. There's not a single female character in that. Just one yeah. Female character, thanks. And that, I don't think, has fallen to the same kind of issues that Little Women have, where male voters just haven't shown up to the BAFTA screenings. And I think that's quite interesting as a kind of point that we're at in this time.
Yeah, I mean, I totally have to agree with Carice there. It's totally beyond me that, like, in 2020 we're still here debating if a film like with a mainly female cast should have something in it for, like, men, to force them to go and watch a film. I mean, I'm like, is it just so hard to understand it? Like, we're just human beings, and we're just sharing, like, the same emotions and everything. So it's nothing like with gender defining, like, our emotions or the way we live our lives. So it's just crazy and, like, kind of a not very progressive thinking maybe, but yeah, I don't know. And also, like, speaking about gender, I've read some interesting things about, like, the character of Joe being, like, kind of coded in, like, queer things, and, like, and I mean, I think that could be, like, a reading of the film. And I mean, I wasn't really bothered in the end by the fact that she could be getting married with a man, because I mean, in the end, I mean, it's her life. She a very independent character. She's like, she has a progressive mind. She's really open-minded. She knows what she wants to do with her life, and she's really, like, yeah, leading her life. So I'm not I'm not one of those women who thinks, like, you shouldn't be. I mean, she's not defined by a man, and if she decides to just get married with a man, that's perfectly fine. And I think it's interesting to see, like, the two storylines of, like, Joe and Meg together, especially, like, regarding the how they see marriage. Marriage is quite an important part, like, in all the film. We go, like, different ways of, like, dealing with the idea of, like, getting married with a man and maybe not being able to just thrive in the artistic scene. So everything is really taken for cared for, like, in the script. So yeah, what I was trying to say is that, I mean, whatever the reading and the characters, I really love, like, how Jo was played, and also, like, the fact that she was kind of gender non-conforming in terms of, like, dresses and also, like, costumes and what she was thinking, what she said in the film. So it's just such a modern adaptation of the novel, and yeah, I mean, it was just great.
Yeah, I think all the things that we're saying about the film, I think mainly, if we were going to summarise them, I think the thing to get across is this is not a staid, stuffy period adaptation of a 19th century novel. I mean, obviously, it's an adaptation of a 19th century novel, but there's a lot of modern ideas woven in here. There's a very modern approach taken to it, and it is very interesting. There's a lot going on. I mean, it's a very good story, and it's very easy, in my opinion, to follow, and, you know, it's very involving, but there is also a lot of very good ideas going on, both on the surface and under the hood, if you peer a little bit little bit closer. So there's a lot to recommend it.
Well, and I think that is a complete in honor of that novel, that 19th century novel being very modern, being very feminist, being a wonderful, wonderful piece that people want to relook at in different ways over and over and over time. And of course, to Greta Gerwig, who did, I think we all agree, an exceptional job that should be, at least if it's not in this round of nominations, it will over time be very, very well appreciated, and we hope you go see it. And on to our next film, which has done actually quite well in the nominations and awards so far. 1917 by Sam Mendes, directed by Sam Mendes. Jim, why don't you give us a little bit of an overview of what this film's all about?
So, as the title of the film kind of gives away, it's set during the First World War, and basically we are following two British soldiers stationed in France who are given a task at the start of the film, and it turns out that basically the Germans have retreated from the front lines and an assault is being planned by British forces elsewhere. And the forces that are going to be launching that assault include the brother of one of the soldiers that we follow, which is Lance Corporal Blake, played by Dean Charles Chapman, who's probably better known to folk as Tommen Baratheon, or at least I think it is. I haven't actually bothered to look this up, but he certainly looks like him. And the other one is Lance Corporal Schofield, played by George Mackay, who is chosen by Blake to go with him. And basically, the shtick for the film, right, is that it's a single take. Now, it's not actually a single take. I think the longest individual take is about 9 minutes, I've read, and then it's kind of got special effects wizardry to stitch it together. But basically, we follow them crossing no man's land, going out into the countryside, encountering, other soldiers, opposition forces, and basically the trials that they need to overcome in order to deliver this message from their commanding officer to the other commanding officer. And it deals a lot with the horrors of war and the things that were encountered and, kind of maybe some of the politics within British forces at the time, maybe even today. And basically that's the thing. We follow them on that journey as a kind of an uninterrupted journey, effectively. Directed by Sam Mendes, who's done quite well in terms of box office lately. He did a couple of Bond films and so forth. The cinematographer is Roger Deakins, of course. So you can imagine the film looks very good. But I suppose we've all seen it here, so I'm curious as to what you thought about it, because obviously it's a very big technical undertaking, and it's a very sort of like impactful story in time. So what did you make of it?
Well, I have to admit that I saw it right after Little Women and was bawling my eyes out of happiness with Little Women. So I was also not incredibly excited to see this film because I knew it was going to be depressing. One thing I have to say is this idea of the gimmick film of the one take. I really am ready for that whole idea to be over. Was it Birdman that started it? I think Orson Welles was quite fond of the long take, but the idea that this film has to be one take and that's why it's getting all this buzz is annoying to me. And so I watched the film through that lens of being like, there's another one, and that frustrated me a bit. But having said that, I was able to get immersed in the story, and I think I didn't expect. So the positives of it is that I didn't expect to feel. It almost felt like a tense horror film to me in a bit, and so it was. There were many times in the theater that I kind of gasped, and so I quite enjoyed that take on a war film versus others that I've seen in the past.
Yeah, I mean, I think the supposed one take is never going to not be a gimmick. I do have an issue with films that end up playing upon this sort of one idea. It's this one story that pops up in the news. It's the one thing that sort of gets it that initial media attention. And to a certain extent, I think it sort of ends up undervaluing everything else that's maybe going on in the film. I think that being said, the one take for this film does make sense to a certain extent because of that kind of relentlessness of war and this long journey that they're going on and that sort of inability to ever just take a break. Like, you can't just turn off and stop paying attention in war. And I think it shows that through some of the things that happen in the film, that if you turn away your attention, you forget where you are, you forget what context you're in, you can maybe end up making quite a wrong footing. I appreciated the film. I enjoyed it. I found it entertaining. I must say I did have quite a laugh at the number of times where George McKay's character would maybe arrive at a new regiment, encounter a new group of people, and there seemed to be this trope continuing of every time he went to find the person he was looking for, they would have their back to him, they would turn around, and they would be some incredible member of like male British actor glitterati. Like, we were sitting there thinking, like, who else can come up? Like, is Charles Dance gonna appear? Like, where's Hugh Grant? I mean, we decided there were a lot of people that were probably off in head offices and not necessarily on the battlefield, but I mean, literally you can make a drinking game out of it. Like, everyone is in it, and I think they probably had a lot of fun making it as bleak as the final result is on film. I think some of those swooping shots as they kind of go through the trenches and pick their way through the battlefield are probably a lot of fun for Sam Mendes and Roger Deakins to shoot. And also a shout out to Christy Wilson-Cairns, who co-wrote the film with Sam Mendes, who is a Glasgow-born female writer who I think we should be keeping our eyes on. I think she's co-writing Edgar Wright's new film with him. Definitely keep an eye on her for when she gets to write a film by herself.
So, well, I've actually seen the film just yesterday, and I have to say I was pretty taken by the film, and also all this idea of like the one take, which to me is not really a one take, maybe like a couple of takes. But anyway, let's not debating on that. And I mean, first of all, I usually don't read anything about a film before going to watch that, so I pretty much didn't know anything about this film. On top of being like a film set in the First World War, just because it's like 1917. So, I mean, as I said, I was really, really engrossed by the way it's like shot, and I think that like the one take thing really interesting, and quite a great way of like dealing with like what you can experience like in war, as Carice was saying, and also it added like to the kind of a sense of suspense to the scenes, and then the idea of like not knowing what could have happened like just a second later, because I mean the field of vision for like the viewers is like not really wide, so you can't see what's happening like in the background, or like in a field like half meter from the other characters. So that was really intriguing. But then when I went home, just like logged on Twitter and then had a look at like what people were starting to say about the film, and I found this tweet, and it was like, finally a movie that accurately represents World War I as a smooth and continuous experience of exciting thrills and action. And well, I mean, World War I wasn't really thrill and actions. It was like a stale war. Basically, everyone was like in the trenches, not moving, and pretty much dying of like of agony, and like not an accurate representation maybe of like what the First World War was. But then at the same time, it was really great to see that like on a screen. So I'm kind of now I'm debating with myself: should I have liked this film or not? What should be like my take on this film? So I don't know, I'm just doubting myself, but at first I was really enjoying that, and I thought it was a great film.
So I think the technical details, the whole... First off, I'm glad that Serena said that we're not going to debate whether it was a single take or not, because I'm not willing to debate it. It was not a single take. It appears as two takes, but that doesn't make for as good marketing. But you know, let's move on. But that aside, I do think it was quite well done in that respect, and it was really impressive. And I agree with Carice in that it does to me make thematic sense. It's a continuous journey. It's very unrelenting in that sense. It's a very tense film. It's quite stressful in that way, and I think that puts you into that situation quite well with that technique. So whilst it is a bit of a gimmick, I do think it works very well here, and it also allows a different way of kind of like setting up your understanding of spaces and scenes. So the film opens with on the two of them having a nap, I think, and basically it tracks them the camera's moving backwards and they're moving forward through a field through their company, and it's kind of beautifully done how like little details come into the frame. You can start to see the rest of their company around them, and then you start to move into kind of a darker space where they're then given their mission by their commanding officer. And in that respect, it's very well done. It is very meticulously thought out, and I think it adds to the way you engage with the film. Where my problem with it comes in, maybe in the minority in this room on that, but we'll see, is whilst I found technically the storytelling very good and it involved me in kind of the physical action that was going on, I really didn't get a sense of any character on screen. It felt a little bit to me like when you combine that technique of trying to make it appear continuous with them moving through different spaces and kind of encountering different people along the way, and some wild coincidences, which are, they make for nice symbolism, but I mean, it does, to me, take me out of the film a little bit. I'm not gonna lie, it felt a little bit like a video game to me at points. It has that same kind of like continued, it's got, I don't know if anybody here has ever played any of these like open world computer games, but it felt like that sort of thing where you're going through a landscape and then you'll encounter a non-player character and there'll be a little thing that happens, and then you move on whilst you're trying to do a bigger mission, but there's like these little side missions. And in that respect, it actually kind of, over time, it took me out of the film. Like, the continuous take, it started off excellently and really kind of informed the way that they were building spaces, but after a while, it didn't really add to anything. I will say the film looks incredible. I'm a fan of Roger Deakins anyway, and it's kind of like, his trademark now seems to be fires in the dark. Right, or like orange light, like Blade Runner 2049 had that, Skyfall, that seems to be his thing at the moment. But it looks incredible, and there's one scene in particular, which I think is in the trailer, where George Mackay's running around in kind of like a set of abandoned buildings. There's a fire raging, there's flares going off. It looks incredible. The main thing for me is the characters of Blake and Schofield. I never really got a feel for them. Why did they have? It almost felt like the reason that you needed to have Blake's brother a part of the company that they're going to is because there's not really much woven in about why they would be so motivated to do this. And there is a little bit of a hint to basically the shit show that was World War I in terms of organisation and like motivation of the forces for this conflict. And it feels like basically the only reason they made it his brother is because that's what would motivate them to do it. So it kind of introduces to me character motivation, not issues, but an absence of them. Beyond, like, you don't really get much of a sense of what these characters want beyond survival. Now, maybe that is thematically consistent with the way it's shot, but it does mean that over time, I think you start to be slightly less involved in the characters, because once you've settled into the storytelling rhythm that is set up by this continuous take, stuff starts to fade a little bit. It's only when you get towards the end and there's a very spectacular set piece that involves a company going over the top where that then kind of like pulled me back into the film. So it's a case of it does constantly pull you back in, but the reason it needs to do that is because it does, for me anyway, it did slowly lose me over stretches before it then wrenched me back into it.
See, for me, the idea of World War I has always been that it's so confusing and was always something that like art responded to, in the sense that it was absolutely heart-wrenching and confusing and kind of and almost unexplainable. And in some way, I disagree with you in the sense that I felt for those characters a lot, actually, at the beginning. And I felt the motivation to be in an environment where you don't know why you're doing it. You're just being told to do something and to go through these trenches. And it felt with the way it was shot, as you said, with Roger Deakins, I thought it was really stunning in that way, because I really did feel for these people who probably had no particular motivation. And then when they were in the German bunkers, they were realizing those people probably had very similar sort of things. And just by the fact that, like, accidentally some plane comes by and stabs him, that's kind of war, and I gathered that in the sense that, like, it's by accident whether or not you survive or you don't.
But that's almost kind of what my issue was with it. It has these moments. It has these moments where there'll be a little sign in a trench, or there'll be something with some detail which then maybe speaks to a slightly that maybe speaks to a slightly deeper analysis of this than war is horrible, right? But because of the way the film is telling its story, you have no time to linger on these things. It's right, okay, on to the next thing. We need to get them to, we need to get them to the cherry orchard, right? We need to get them to the farmhouse, right? We need to get... It's... In a way, it doesn't give itself an opportunity to deal with these things. And I think by putting in these little details in there, it does want to do that, but it doesn't quite get the room to breathe. And I understood, I did feel for the characters. More what I'm getting at is you don't really get any sense of an inner self. And there are basically a moment for each of those main characters, Blake and Schofield, where you get more of a sense of them as people. So there's one moment with... Blake, and then there's another one kind of like a little bit later on. Actually, Schofield gets a couple, I would say. But they're so few and far between because we don't get the opportunity to really sit with those characters all that long. Like the camera goes in for a close-up, but it's barely there for that long because before you know it, we're pulling back to a medium shot and we're on the move again. So... To me, it's a difficult one because I find myself very split on this film. I do think there's a lot to recommend it, but it's just I didn't get as emotionally involved with it as I feel the film wanted me to.
Actually, I kind of disagree on that point because I actually felt like I was like connected with the characters, and I mean I don't get the whole idea of a war to begin with, but I kind of got the idea of like having to do something because you were ordered to do something, and then you're trying to find like the motivation to do that. And in that case for Blake was like to save his brother, which is like perfectly fine in that kind of environment. You wanting to find like a kind of a bigger reason or like just a motivation to do that because you don't want to die for no reason or for a war you're not even interested in to begin with. So I found that really, really gripping, and like you can connect with that. It's a feeling we all share, kind of, even though we're not in that situation. And the idea of like having these kind of quests, I think, I mean, it was like in the mission itself. I mean, it's obviously basically the only thing that gets you going is like adrenaline. So you're trying to do something, you basically running out of time, you're running against time. So obviously it's like you're kind of splitting your journey into a series of like little quests. And yes, it's a video game in the end, okay, we know that. But then, I mean, just you have to do something as a first step, and as another step, and obviously it's end up being like a sequence of like quests and stuff to get to the end game, which is like saving your brother, saving like all the battalion and everything. And just to go back just a tiny bit on the one-shot thing. At first I was really sold, and I thought it was like just a thing for like setting up the scene, and I thought, oh my god, that's great, that's amazing, because you were kind of introducing the setting and like slithering in the trenches, and that was amazing. And then you get to the first general, and then you've got for just a brief second it's like a subjective shot, and then it turns like into like objective shot. It was just great, and I was like, oh, amazing, just some amazing way to start a film. And then when I figured out that, oh my god, that's the film, just 1 or 2 shots, I was like, that's a tiny bit of a bravado here. I mean, that's a man like directing the film, so who could have known? I mean, yeah, amazing. And the end, I was like, as I said, like really enjoying the film, but maybe in hindsight I should maybe change my mind on something. But anyway, I felt like really connected on an emotional level. So yeah.
I actually the single take thing, right? I think that just I need to say that to me, Serena's nailed it there, because I actually think that, like, we talk about kind of like creativity coming out of restrictions, right? I actually think that Sam Mendes has ended up doing the opposite here, right? Because the long take was a very good way of setting up the space, the characters, introducing us to the world, and I think it really did work beautifully there. But I actually think that basically he is then later in the film, and this maybe speaks to why I didn't engage with the characters as much, I actually think he's ended up restricting the visual language that he can use there a little bit. That's, to me, it does seem like that technical gimmick, and we'll call it a gimmick because I mean, as the film goes on, I do think it is, has restricted the way that he can tell the story visually after that, and I think that could be the reason why I didn't engage with it as deeply as I maybe could or should have.
I think it is a gimmick, and I then, while we've been talking, kind of had to look back at why I remembered the long take is such a big thing, and it started. One film I remember it from was Atonement, and he had that one famous really long take that was beautiful that kind of showed the horror of war happening in France. I feel like I'm watching the same. That's my problem. I'm watching this Dunkirk, and I'm watching which is a video game in its own way. It's just structured differently. And then I'm watching this film, which is a journey, like a journey, and it's a video game over and over and over again. And it's good. It's enjoyable. People seem to enjoy it in the audience. I enjoyed it. I had a thrill ride. But is it amazing? I don't know.
So noting that it just picked up the BAFTA for Best Drama Film, do they categorize by? Yeah. So Best Drama Film of the last year. Oscar predictions. Do we think that it stands a chance to win the big award?
Well, I don't know. I actually bring that's a really good point to bring up, because I thought it was interesting watching the Golden Globes. I stayed up all night. I was shocked that Netflix got completely snubbed for everything. I really thought Irishman was going to, because honestly, I haven't seen The Irishman in its full, but the way that Jim and Luca were talking about it being so incredibly amazing, I was shocked. So I was expecting 1917 had to be quite good.
Well, yeah, but Joker, Luca was also in love with Joker, so I'm going to say you should take everything that Luca or I said with a pinch of salt, perhaps.
I mean, I think of the films that are currently being placed in the Big Picture Award from predictions, so that's the likes of 1917, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, Joker, and Parasite are currently the big names out there. I've actually regrettably not seen Parasite yet. I'm really looking forward to it. I hear lots of good things. I think it would be incredible if it did sweep up the Best Picture award from what I've heard, but I think it's unlikely. I think the second a film finds itself in the, is it non-English language they're calling the category now? They've changed it recently. The second a film finds itself in that category as well, I think people just defer. They say, well, I'll vote for it in that category. I don't need to vote for it in the big picture category, which is unfortunate. But I think of of 1917, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, and Joker, I personally would want to put my vote behind Joker. I think although all three of those films are fairly kind of seen it before male narrative, sorry to keep man bashing Jim, Joker at least is something that tries to bring a little bit of something else. I think it handles the topic of mental health really interestingly. I think it handles the topic of budget cuts to health provisions, which is obviously an issue that's going to increasingly face the UK over the next couple of years. And to be honest, I think after the year of films we've had, it's kind of depressing that 1917, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, I mean, come on, and Joker, the films that are being put up there. Yeah.
Well, it would be nice if Little Women would get something in there.
Absolutely, I agree.
I think by the time we get to the Oscars, Little Women probably will. Also, I'm pleased that as we continue to do more shows into 2020, we continue to have somebody flying the flag for Joker, just to sort of test my patience about how much I want to go on about that.
Have you heard that Joker 2 is getting ever increasingly more likely?
I mean, the minute it crossed $1 billion, it became a certainty. One that I will go view along with everybody. Honestly, that film just annoys me so much, but. I'm a little bit. I feel like we've kind of bizarrely for a year where we've got quite a lot of interesting films, and I have seen Parasite, and I think it's excellent. Of the kind of the big candidates kicking around, I would probably give it to Parasite or The Irishman. But put it this way, if Parasite won it, I think that would be an excellent choice. I find it a little bit depressing how many films that were awarded, particularly at the Golden Globes, which splits its Best Picture category. How many of them are kind of typical things you'd expect? So 1917 won. We've discussed 1917. It's a very good film, but I mean, it's another one of these kind of classic awards-friendly films. It's a war film. It's got a technical gimmick that kind of filmmakers will kind of go, oh my god, that was incredible. There's that, and then the other winner in the other category was that famous musical or comedy, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Yeah, that comedy where people get their heads stamped on, hilarious. And we discussed that in the show. I wasn't sold on that at all.
You didn't like that film then?
No,
Right.
well, I liked bits of it, but it felt... I have a very weird relationship with Tarantino's films, and that some I think are brilliant and others I think are very self-indulgent and overlong, and people kind of go nuts over it. Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, for me, was in that latter category. But it's another film. It's another film about films in Hollywood. I mean, we've done this before. I mean, this happened when when everybody went nuts during award season over The Artist, which
Or The Player.
Or La La Land.
Well, exactly. This is my point. Like, it's just that this keeps happening again. And, like, a lot of these films aren't. I mean, The Artist. I'm sorry. Like, not that I want to open up. This probably.
You do. You want to.
Yeah. Okay. I do. Right. The Artist is not a good film. I do not like it. Right. It's a gimmick as a silent film. It doesn't use the same language as silent films, and it's got the same plot as Anchorman. Right? Go look at it. Watch both films back to back. It has the plot of Anchorman.
Once a year, we have to give Jim the artist conversation.
Yeah. Otherwise, I'll just combust. So, like, in terms of predicting like what will win, I don't know. I mean, I've got my choices, but I think it's going to default to that. I guarantee, for instance, that Best Original Screenplay will go to Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. That is absolutely going to happen, because I don't think Tarantino will get Director. I don't think it will get Best Picture. So he'll get that because it needs something.
Isn't he getting away with doing a 14th film by doing like Kill Bill 3, or is that a joke or something like that?
So he said he was going to retire after 10 films, right? But he's counting
10 perfect films, his words.
Oh, seriously? Christ. Well, it used to be 10 films, but he was getting away with this by counting Kill Bill as one film.
Yeah.
Well, I need to pay for 2 tickets, Quentin, so it's 2 films. Like, I had enough of this nonsense.
But I thought I heard he was going to do another sequel or something like that too, so he gets away with it again.
It's in pre-production, or at least it's listed on IMDb.
Interestingly, Jim, I noticed this week that you were tweeting about Alma Hariel's proposition that they should maybe split the directing category as her proposition. Maybe she considers that they should take it further into other categories, and you were sort of asking people to give their 2 cents on this, and also, I guess, questioning why it was only really the acting categories that had historically had this split. And I think when these categories were established, there weren't female directors, there weren't female producers of note, there weren't especially ones that were being positioned as the director. Potentially there's co-directors and other people behind the scenes, but the acting category is the only one that they historically have accepted women have a right to be in, because someone's got to play women, and we can't carry on with the Shakespeare thing of men playing women forever. But I think the acting categories are definitely going to be quite interesting this year. There's so many incredible performances in big ensemble pieces. You've got Charlize Theron and Nicole Kidman and Margot Robbie in Bombshell. It's an opportunity for Margot Robbie to actually have a character, which she doesn't have in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. She's just one of Tarantino's composite fetishes. If that even makes sense. Someone to take her shoes off and wiggle her tootsies around. But having watched Bombshell, I think she's incredible in that. She actually, funnily enough, is a composite character in that, so she sort of is the representative of all the young generation of women who maybe fell victim to Roger Ailes' sexual assaults and sexual advances. And then you've, of course, got all the incredible performances in Little Women. You've got all the incredible men in The Irishman. You've got Pesci, who I think it was quite sad that he lost out to Brad Pitt at the Golden Globes. But I think that's potentially the Netflix label dragging him down. Although I must say, if I'm going to give Once Upon a Time in Hollywood any credit, it's Brad Pitt. He made me laugh. I could play that scene over and over again where he gets pulled off on a stretcher. Away we go. But I think the acting categories, they've got a lot of really brilliant names, and interestingly, a lot of names of people who could be nominated for multiple different films this year.
Yeah, I think the Joaquin Phoenix is probably most likely to win. But incredible performances across all of these films, and I was excited to see Laura Dern win for Marriage Story, because she was my favorite part of that film for sure. And I had a lot of discussions over whether Scarlett Johansson was actually a good actor performance for some friends who have seen it since then. That's an interesting take. But I'm very much looking forward to seeing. And unlike Jim and Serena, I do really, we'll talk about it next month, but I do like an Oscar. I like the Oscars a lot, and I do think they're relevant just because they're some way for us to fight and talk about it.
I know, I was more circumspect because the last time we did this, it was my first show and I was being accommodating and reining in my cynicism. No longer.
So by now you'll know the nominations and of the Oscars, and we can continue the conversation next month.
So A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood is about the so it's a biopic. It's a true story of friendship between Fred Rogers, a fairly well-known American children's TV show presenter. He's someone that if you mention his name to anyone in Britain, they tend to not have any idea who you're talking about, but I think the impression I get is that he's quite celebrated across the generations in America. The story looks at a friendship between Fred Rogers and journalist Tom Junnard, who was writing for Esquire and got tasked with writing a piece on Fred Rogers. He appears as Lloyd Vogel in the film, played by Matthew Rhys, and Fred Rogers is played by Tom Hanks. It's a fairly simple story. It's a cynical journalist being placed in front of possibly one of the most impossibly positive, good, true, honest people that has maybe, walked this earth perhaps, but certainly been a part of entertainment. But Mariel Heller, the director, takes what is quite a simple story, quite a simple format of the biopic, and I think she really just she creates an incredible film out of it. She uses the format of the TV show. She uses some of the kind of childlike animations and graphics and stuff that there would have been in this TV show, and she weaves that into the film, and it makes it more fun to watch. It makes it more interesting and exciting to watch than some of your more traditional biopic format films. Tom Hanks is incredible. I don't think there's anyone else that could play Fred Rogers. He possesses the same essence that I feel like Fred Rogers does. He seems like someone who would hold the door open for you, someone that would pick something up off the floor if you drop it. He's someone who feels like he's not being tarnished by the sort of ego and cynicism that can maybe reach you in American entertainment. I've seen the documentary that came out about Fred Rogers at the end of last year. That was called Won't You Be My Neighbor? And both the documentary and the film, you sit there and you think, surely not. Like, surely this person can't exist. Something that give it another couple of minutes and we're going to hit that point where the bad news comes out, the news story that's kind of prevailed across a lot of British children entertainers. But it doesn't. He's great, and he says incredible things like, I don't eat anything that has a mother, and your heart just melts. I'd like to know what you guys think of it.
Well, ultimately, I pretty much agree with you. I mean, I also did grow up with Mr. Rogers, and it wasn't. I really wish I had seen the documentary because I think I would quite enjoy it, and I think it was one of the top-grossing documentaries of like 2018. I really, really liked the direction of this film, and I think I wrote in our blog that Mariel Heller's like "Can You Ever Forgive Me" was one of my favorite films of last year as well. The only thing is I would say is because I had no expectation of what the story was, I think there was a little bit of time really focused on the journalist and his life. And while I know that's an important part of of the film and the story. I think it was weighted a lot more on that way, and sometimes I wanted to see more of the Tom Hanks special, story of that, because I was really loving that part. So that's the only little bit of criticism I would have.
So the funny thing is, the weighting of it towards the journalists played by Matthew Rhys is actually really what I liked about it. Now, maybe this comes from the fact that I hadn't seen the documentary. I'd hoped to watch it before we reviewed the film, but basically my knowledge of Fred Rogers is zero. I mean, basically it's a name that pops up in American pop culture for me before I went to see this film. And to somebody who, like me, who can be a bit of a hard-bitten cynic when I want to be, this kind of looks like the sort of like gooey, syrupy film that I maybe would grow a bit tired of. It's not that film. I really do think it's excellent, and part of that is because what I find interesting about it as a biopic is it doesn't do that thing of chronicling things from someone's life and what effect it had on their state of mind, and it doesn't do that. And I think for somebody like Fred Rogers, as I now understand him, it takes a very intelligent approach in that it shows his impact on other people. Because I think what's interesting about Fred Rogers is the degree of reverence with which he is treated, certainly by people I know in real life, but also the characters in the film. So by showing the impact he has on Matthew Rhys's character, who's had a difficult relationship with his father, he has unresolved issues there. Like, as the film starts, he basically gets into an altercation with his father at his sister's wedding. And then the way that he goes on to process that, and then seeing what effect that has on children, and what Fred Rogers and Fred Rogers Show means to them, to me, it actually works out as a more interesting, more impactful way of telling that story. The kind of the value of kindness, the value of being able to talk about emotions, and it really, really hit home for me. The elements for, like, the connective bits that are done in the style of kind of like the miniatures, at first it didn't really work for me, to be honest, but I think what that gives, again, is very intelligently done, because I think what that does is that gives that warm sort of nostalgia for Mr. Rogers' neighbourhood that the story itself isn't actually, right? Because it focuses on the journalist and his interactions and the impact that Fred Rogers has, you're not getting that kind of nostalgic element that people love from the sort of film from that. But you do get it from these kind of like, these little kind of like stylistic elements that give that. So I actually think that's quite well placed, and it gives people who are familiar with that show from their childhood, it maybe gives them that little thing to latch on to with a bit of fondness in addition to the story. I really thought it was excellent. I thought Tom Hanks, of course, like as Carice said, is excellent and kind of is perfectly suited for that role. I think Matthew Rhys, who's done a lot of excellent television work with the Americans, but I think he gets a very good role here. I think Marielle Heller also handles New York very well as a period piece. I mean, Mandel will be able to speak to that better than I do, but in the same way that she did with Can You Ever Forgive Me, which was another excellent film, I think this whole thing just comes together excellently, and the key thing is you don't really need to know anything about Fred Rogers in order to get something out of this film.
Yeah, but I think what you exactly said, hearkening back, I mean, without those moments, and if it was just a story about this journalist, and you're not hearkening back to that warm feeling that show gives, particularly an American who watched it for so many years, it's sad that it didn't actually come over, because it's probably one of our best public television shows ever, but it certainly, there was a mood created in that film, and I do believe that Heller does that really well, and she does that really well for New York, and I think it was also Pittsburgh as well, so really, really well done. So A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood comes out on the 31st of January across the UK. Check it out. So the final film we're going to be reviewing is Uncut Gems. It will be out on a short run in UK theaters, and then on the 31st will be on Netflix. Jim, tell us a little bit about this film.
So Uncut Gems is directed by the Safdie brothers, Josh and Ben. They've done several films before. I think the one that's probably best known, and the only other one I've actually seen of theirs, is Good Time, which starred Robert Pattinson and made quite a splash a couple of years ago in kind of, art house circles, I think. And basically the setup for the film is Adam Sandler is a jewelry store owner in the Diamond District in New York. He has acquired a black opal, which is, it's not been cut, it's not been polished, it's the kind of the raw gemstone, if you like. And we're introduced at the start of the film to this, and kind of it being mined in Ethiopia in very trying circumstances, and it very quickly transitions to Adam Sandler in New York. And basically it follows him trying to get this gem auctioned. Basically, he has paid quite a lot of money for it. He's under the impression he can get over $1 million for it at auction, and basically it's this spiraling set of circumstances, not too unlike their last film, where he lends this to a basketball player, Kevin Garnett, who seems to think it imbues him with mystical powers and allows him to play better. So he keeps it overnight. Needless to say, this doesn't really go according to plan, and Howard, who gets increasingly more frantic to try and get this back, and also has a bit of a gambling issue and is known to pawn clients' collateral at pawn shops. We see him doing that very early on. And basically, it's just how the situation continues to be just ahead of him, and him constantly trying to keep up with that situation. And then various other characters coming around it. Obviously, you've got Kevin Garnett, the basketball player. He's got a mistress. He's kind of semi-estranged from his wife, who's played by Idina Menzel. But apart from that, it's all kind of... There are quite a lot of first-time actors in here. His mistress is played by Julia Fox. And there are other characters that come in and out of the story. I think maybe a recurring one is Lakeith Stanfield, who people would know from Get Out, Sorry to Bother You, and things like that. So, what did you make of it?
Oh, boy. I mean, this film should come with an anxiety warning. I think it was about 10, 15 minutes in, and I genuinely considered turning it off because my heart was racing so fast. And I was at home alone, and I was like, hey, if something happens to me, but I'm so glad I stuck with it. I should note that 10, 15 minutes in, it wasn't that I wasn't liking it. It was that my body was having a physiological reaction to it. But I'm so glad I stuck with it. I genuinely think this is one of my favorite films of the last year. It is, talking about feats of filmmaking, the pace that they managed to keep up in this film, it does not pause for more than a second is it 2 hours 10? Obviously, Adam Sandler's the kind of the rock in the middle of this film, and that's a big thing. The Safdie brothers, I understand, have had this film kind of sitting on their desk for about 10 years now, and they always saw it as Adam Sandler was always that character, and they basically weren't going to make it until they convinced Adam Sandler to play that role. And I think they approached him probably about 10 years ago when they first kind of had the idea, and they themselves say quite fairly he brushed them off. They were not well known then, but I think it's brilliant that they've stuck around and waited for him to come along and play the character, because I just love watching him. I am not an Adam Sandler film fan, and by Adam Sandler film, everyone knows what I mean. I mean the Adam Sandler films. But, I enjoyed Punch Drunk Love. I enjoyed that film that he did with Don Cheadle a little while ago, the Reign Over Me. And I really do actually enjoy seeing him playing an interesting character. And the Safdie brothers said that they sort of took a lot of inspiration from Paul Thomas Anderson's desire to sort of build Punch Drunk Love around what he believed Adam Sandler was and what he believed Adam Sandler could convey, and they kind of did a similar thing. They wanted to create this character that was in some ways completely hopeless, but also so convinced by himself and his mission. You kind of pity him, but you root for him. You also kind of hate him a bit. You're shouting at the screen for him to make different decisions. And yeah, you talk about these moments where he's pawning other people's belongings, and I think they did some really clever decisions with the structure there, where there are some things where you're like, okay, I understand what's going on, I know what belongs to him, what doesn't belong to him, and then something that you realize that he's sold off or pawned maybe a couple of scenes ago, someone comes and up to him on the street and is like, hey man, where's my watch, or whatever it is, and you realize quite how tangled this web he's in is, and he has no desire to get out of it. Like that is a character with a gambling addiction, that is a character with all sorts of things going on in their head that they don't want it to slow down, they don't want it to stop. And it's such a rich film in its design as well. You know, they create this his home life, so his family, but also his extended family. Medina Menzel plays his estranged wife, and they go and they spend time at her family's, and there's all these women, and they're loud, and they're trying on dresses, and they're screaming, and all the men are sitting and smoking cigars, and it's not a world that you necessarily want to go and spend much time in yourself, but it's well created, it's rich, it's really believable, and I loved it.
It's funny you mentioned the thing about people being loud in the family home, because this is an incredibly anxious film, right? It is really quite anxiety-inducing. One of the things that struck me about this film is, and I think it is actually one of the things that in the early stages actually really sets this anxious tone straight away, is quite how many people are talking over one another. Like in the jewellery store, it's very unusual for a film to do that, or at least to foreground that. You know, like people talking over each other is a common thing, but it's usually like background noise to a scene, and the conversations and dialogue are very well structured. In the opening scenes of Uncut Gems, that is not the case. It is utter chaos, and it's all very kind of like trivial. There's nothing terribly dramatic happening at that precise point, but it puts you right into the correct kind of like state of mind for this film straight away. And then after that, everything... It's one of these films where I think everything combines to just create this atmosphere that we've spoken about. The music, I think, is part of that as well, and that's very similar to... I think it's the same person, Daniel Lopatin. My pronunciation's terrible. But it's the same person who collaborated with the Safdies to do the score for Good Time, which this does share quite a lot of similarities with. But what's interesting about it is, to me, it feels like a far less kinetic film. There's a lot of stuff going in Good Time, which kind of centres on a bank robbery gone wrong, where, you know, Robert Pattinson's sprinting about the place and the camera follows him. And it's still got that kind of like, you know, jittery handheld quality to it in certain places, but it's a far more speedy film. What's interesting about Uncut Gems is it maintains a momentum, it maintains a jitteriness and an anxiety, whilst being, in a way, quite deliberate. I mean, it doesn't follow Sandler at great, but I mean, there are tracking shots where they track him down a street, and as you say, like people coming up and saying, you know, hi Howard, how you doing, and all that. But it's all very deliberate, and it's kind of just this constant building of tension, and then it gets you to a level very quickly, and then it holds it for the entire film as the whole thing just spirals around them, and all the decisions really play into that. I think I'm not really sure anybody other than Adam Sandler could really play this role, because it needs that frustration with this guy, because he does some really idiotic things. He does some things which are obviously a symptom of addiction as well. And all these things are going on, but he still, and I think this is down to Sandler, it still retains that kind of like core likability that means you empathise with him, right? As frustrated as you are still with this character, right? He doesn't lose you at any, or certainly he didn't lose me at any point. So it's one of these films that I think has a strange alchemy where all these things come together to create an atmosphere and a mood that just has you hooked the entire time. And I haven't been as anxious in a film since Lynn Ramsey, You Were Never Really Here. Completely different type of film, but that was one where I felt like I was having an anxiety attack for 2 hours solid. It's not quite up there, but it is one of these films where you will find it hard to shake off immediately afterwards, because you're just going to feel so tense and on edge.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if anyone's looking for a present for me in the next year, then I would love a Diamante encrusted Furby to hang around my neck. Possibly one of the greatest little props that the film has. But yeah, I mean, I think it's going back to the sort of like physiological effect that this film had on me. There's a moment maybe about beginning of the final third where Adam Sandler's character is faced with yet another decision of which way he goes, and I felt like I was almost suspended for just like a couple of seconds as you wait. You're like, this is it. If he just makes the right decision here, he's going to be out of it. It's all, and then you just like, you drop down and he, you know, obviously makes the wrong decision once again.
Okay, so as Amanda said, it's out on January 31st on Netflix, so everybody will be able to watch it then. It is getting a short run in cinemas as this goes out. It should be screening at the Film House, I believe, for at least another couple of days. So if you get a chance to see it on a big screen, as ever, as I tend to end up saying on the show, I think it's worth it, but if not, then anybody could watch it on Netflix, and I would highly recommend it. And last time I checked, their previous film, Good Time, was also on Netflix, so if you like Uncut Gems, I'd encourage you to check that out afterwards as well.
All right, well, that wraps us up for our reviews this month. Just a note that on the 29th of January, we will be running our first networking night, Cinetopia Film Industry Networking Night on the 29th. That's from 7 to 10 at the lovely Brewdog Lothian. We'll also be running a new film pub quiz with our collaborators, Lily Sandelin and Ali Murray, and some other people who will be emceeing it. It's all supposed to be fun. It's free, and I highly recommend you bring your friends and test your film knowledge. I think it'll be another fun way to play with film discussion in Edinburgh. Jim, what's up for you in the next month?
So a few things. I think the biggest thing for me personally will probably end up being... Well, actually, it's a little bit more than a month. We'll probably talk about it in the next show. It's probably going to be Glasgow Film Festival, but there's a lot going on. I'm trying to secure a few screeners for Sundance Film Festival, which is going to start shortly. So see what there is there. No doubt we're going to have a couple of people, and I'm going to know more people who are going to Berlin, so that's going on. So really just keeping an eye on what comes out of there and seeing what people are interested in and impressed by in those festivals that are coming up.
Yeah, I haven't bought my tickets to Berlin yet, but I'm definitely considering it. It was so much fun the last couple of years. Serena, what are you looking forward to in the next month?
Well, in pretty much a couple of days, I'll be going to Rotterdam to the film festival.
Oh,
so
wonderful.
it'll be like my first time there. I'm pretty excited because they have this amazing program, like featuring East Asian films. So yeah, I'm really excited. And then I'm planning on going to the Berlinale as well, like in February. And then there's the Glasgow Film Festival. So there's a lot of things coming up, like in the next few months. So yeah, great.
Well, we look forward to hearing all about it when you get back.
Yeah, totally. Thanks.
And Carice.
Yeah, just a shout out that the Edinburgh Short Film Festival submissions are now open. 2020 is the festival's 10-year anniversary, so we're going to have lots of special events celebrating that. The program, I think, is going to be almost about twice the length as it was the previous couple of years.
Wow.
But there's still plenty of space for films through submissions, so please, if you've got a short that you want to submit, then send it to us.
Any hints of what 10 years is going to look like and 10 years of Edinburgh Short Film Festival?
Yeah, well, I mean, when the festival first started, even though it was just 10 years ago, we were taking submissions through DVDs and maybe floppy disks, I'm not sure. So, yeah, we're kind of looking to do something that sort of harks back to that time, but also celebrates where we're at now. Logistically speaking, it's a lot easier to be taking submissions through Film Freeway. There's also a lot of archive material that we've got from presenters over the last couple of years, footage of parties and events during the festival, so we're looking to kind of pull that together, and also maybe getting some special messages in from filmmakers that we've screened in the past, as well as films that they've been up to since.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all for joining us. It's been a wonderful month of films, and I'm sure that next month will be even more exciting. We'll be talking a lot about festivals, but we might also throw in a little Oscar conversation as well, because I'm looking forward to debating with Jim on that. Please follow us. If you have questions or queries, please follow us at Cinetopia Hub at Instagram or at Cinetopia on Twitter, and cinetopiahub.com. You can find out about all of our events. Thanks again, and see you next month.